Hello, everybody. I want to finish what I began in the preceding video. I was into chapter 2 of uh, Across the Reel, and I was in the first section of chapter 2 called Master Jacques, Maître Jacques, and I stopped after this chapter begins on page 25, and I stopped on at the top of page 31. So there's 2.5 pages left before I get to section 2. So I hope to do that today. So just to remind us of the argument, because I think there is a sort of logical progression going on. At the end of chapter 1, Zizek said that what distinguishes his use of Lacan and of psychoanalysis from others is the rejection of the conformist component. He takes the example of the psychoanalysts who came to the United States in the 1940s and who had as a sort of moral principle that if you were unfaithful in your marriage, that was something that needed to be analyzed, but in the marriage itself was not a symptom and didn't need to be analyzed. And Zizek remarks first that it was the other way around, or it is the other way around in Argentina. So his only conclusion from all that is get rid of the conformist moral foundations and conclude that everything is to be analyzed. The normal is just as pathological as the abnormal or the exceptional or the transgressive or whatever. So with that conclusion, and also the development in chapter 1 that psychoanalysis is not just on the couch, it's in the culture. So everything is to be analyzed, including cultural phenomena. So chapter 2 is called The Object Lacan. So that means that Lacan, between quotation marks, is an object to be analyzed just like everything else. And that's what he proceeds to do. So from the part that I've read, so section 1 is called Master Jacques, Master Jack. First, Zizek distinguishes the folk idea of psychoanalysis, which he attributes to Jung and to James Joyce. We can agree with him there or not, but everyone knows that there is this folk psychoanalysis which he ties to a notion of a stream of consciousness and a sort of verbal diarrhea, and to all sorts of whatever folklore that you might find attached to it. This folklore is something that we can see. I mean, it's useful to know the folklore. The hero's journey is a set of folkloric elements, but it was used quite knowingly by George Lucas in Star Wars. So it's good to be able to see as a first step in analyzing film like Star Wars, and it's been sort of generalized and used in writing manuals for screenplays and novels and so on all over the place. It's good to be aware of the myth of the hero, or the hero's journey with all the different steps, and to be aware that this is in fact a simplification of uh, Jung's theories. So it's probably a simplification of uh, Joyce's novelistic structures. So straight after he talks about uh, uh, the collapse of war. A little later, he talks about the collapse of the wave packet to get to some sort of um, uh, definite position where you have the wave packet of all the virtual possibilities superposed, and then you collapse the wave packet with a sort of a quilting point, and everything becomes determinate. So I think uh, these are the two extremes, that you can have this sort of vast stream of consciousness, and one could argue that maybe Jung's work, if you take the whole work, is just different possibilities superposed one on the other, um, of which the archetypes is only one system amongst the many systems that he employed. So, and James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, is not the hero's journey, um, although you could find the hero's journey inside it. Finnegan's Wake is this virtual superposition of different waves of probability. And then the hero's journey, just as if you use that as a key to reading Jung, if you use that to um, uh, be a key to reading Finnegan's Wake, you will get a reading, but only by collapsing the wave packet and coming to a definite reading, which Zizek says is not all bad. It's already something. But you have to collapse and quilt in the right way. So there are good collapsings and bad collapsing. Anyhow, that's page 25. Page 26, the thing that stands out is a progression in the reflection on the real that Zizek began in chapter 1. So that's where he comes up with his own position on the real by quoting Lacan, who says that reality is only a grimace of the real, and inversely. So the real is only a grimace of reality. Zizek prefers the second version because the reality is only a grimace of the real, is positing a massive 100% present real that we can somehow get to, and behind everything. And the second, so it's not a radical notion of the real. And the second, and therefore we shall see seeing it that way, seeing reality as a grimace of the real, is going to influence how you approach the cure in psychoanalysis. The inverted version, the real is only a grimace of reality, is a radical reconception of the real. The first version ultimately comes to a chaos, a chaotic real, which is then disciplined and ordered by some sort of system. So you get a disciplined real. The second conception that Zizek aims doesn't have this first chaos, then the real as chaos, and then the real chaotic real submitted to a form, and it becomes what Zizek calls the disciplined real. What you have is the real is not a real that is more fundamental than reality. This is the key. This is Zizek's key. The real is only a pure surface, which is at the same time a distortion. So you don't have the distortion and then behind that the real. The real is in the distortion. So I try to express that in a motto: there is no wild real. To echo Foucault's adage, there's no wild experience, and to say that Zizek agrees, but he goes one step further than Foucault. So then Zizek distinguishes the three registers of the real. So in the triad real, symbolic, imaginary, each one of those can be subdivided into a sub-triad. He doesn't spell it out in detail for the two others here, but he spells it out for the real. There's the imaginary real, the symbolic real, and the real real. So the imaginary real is what Zizek claims has been discovered and deployed by English-speaking intellectuals. So it's the real that is horrible, abyssal, monstrous, and the thing. So that's the imaginary real. That's already good. It's the real, but in the real, it's the imaginary real. Then you get the sort of real that you find in quantum mechanics, because it doesn't mean anything. It's all symbolism in the sense of the symbolic, so mathematical symbolism, if you want. An example of that is Badiou's set theory ontology, but that still doesn't go to the real. So maybe he's talking there about the more refined Lacanians who like the matheme, who like the graphs, and prefer that sort of approach to the real in Lacan. Unfortunately, he regrets that Lacan never managed to spell this out by using Hegel. It's a failed encounter between Lacan and Hegel. But the real is purely formal. It's just an obstacle with no substance. So we have to desubstantify all the time. It's a difference without any substance. So even Derrida is somewhere between maybe the symbolic real and the real. But from that point of view, Derrida will be substantializing difference. Does Deleuze substantialize difference? I think this is an open question. Deleuze has this sort of naive, from the epistemological point of view, style in his early books and in most of his books. So you never know whether he's substantializing his concepts as naively as it seems or not. So that would be, in any case, Zizek's criticism of the philosophies of difference that sort of grew up with structuralism and post-structuralism, where it's on the right track with difference, but it's in danger of falling back into the symbolic real and not getting to the real, because it treats difference as substance. After that, he goes on. This is where he talks about the multiple superposition of waves of concepts, and the reduction or the collapse of the wave packet. This is something that Zizek finds in Lacan, and so Lacan does not have a fixed position. He's rather in the superposition of waves. So that's good, but that puts him at the level of Joyce in Finnegan's Wake, and Jung, if you take the idea that you have to take all of Jung's works with all the different positions, of which the archetypal theory is just one early theory amongst many. And there's Gnosticism, and there's alchemy, and there's parallels with Eastern philosophy, and so on. And Lacan is in danger of being seen in this sort of uncollapsed, superposed wave of possible lines of thought. And there, Zizek says, it's up to us to operate the reduction, to quilt Lacan in the right way. So if Lacan has been quilted by means of an imaginary real, or quilted by means of a symbolic real, or if there are people who refuse to quilt Lacan at all and go into just pure stream of Lacanian concepts and jargon, that's they're failed interpretations. So Zizek says he tries to collapse the wave packet of Lacan's ideas across multiple interpretive gestures. So he doesn't just come up with one ultimate quilting interpretation of Lacan, but he needs to come at it from several different angles. So this means that the idea that the real always is that which always returns to its place is just one of Lacan's positions, and it corresponds to this early massive presence concept of the real. And the problem is it's a non-dialectizable real. So afterwards, Lacan tries to, it's Zizek who uses the word tries to reinterpret the real as that which is non-symbolizable, but which we can't get rid of. So in fact, that's a double concept. There's the real can't is that which cannot be symbolized. So we're looking at the real through the symbolic face. So it can't be symbolized, but we're constantly trying to symbolize it. But the other side is we can't get rid of it either. We can't symbolize it, but we can't get rid of it. So we cannot be totally absorbed into our attempts at symbolization. and nevertheless it's there, but not in the mode of a pure presence, but in the mode of a what he just called a pure difference. So this goes on to a sort of more stratified interpretation of Lacan, in terms of Zizek's differences with Lacan. So Zizek says the differences are over reading. Lacan never really read Hegel. He read what Hegel he read was filtered through Kojevian and Hippolytean spectacles. So he it's a failed encounter with Hegel that we can see play out in Lacan's texts. And so Zizek makes Hegel the key rather than the occasional philosophical allusion. The other difference is the conformism of Lacan. And Zizek agrees with Jacques-Alain Miller that Lacan basically fell into a form of liberal thought. In particular, one can see that in Lacan's critique of the May 68 revolt. And thirdly, a third difference, and here we're getting to which will be developed straight away after, the consequences for these conceptions, these ultimately inadequate conceptions, in terms of the cure. So if you follow through this turn towards conformism, liberalism, and ultimately wisdom, you come to the idea that the encounter with the real is a moment of blinding force, and then you come back to everyday life with wise distance. So you're in a wise or wisdom approach to the real after you can go and transcend into the blinding experience and revelation of the real, but you come back and you conform to the mores of and usages customs of the country, but you're detached. Fabian Tabi comments that it's like the Stoic way or the Buddhist way or the Schopenhauer way. And this is the end of what I did last time. Zizek replies, yes, I detest all that. The crucial problem is one of fidelity. That's the greatness of Alain Badiou. I don't give a damn about the ecstatic moment of the encounter with the real. So, yes, there are ecstatic moments of encounter with the real, but they're not the moment that is to be privileged. And it's not the cynical, distanced, uninvested coming back. It's the coming back and being engaged in a fidelity. And these fidelities we know are multiple for Badiou, fidelity to the different truths in politics, in science, in art, and in love. Fabian Tabi reiterates what Zizek says. In other words, Zizek has just said, I don't give a damn about the ecstatic moment of the discovery of the real. Fabian Tabi, the ecstatic moment that is nauseous, as in Sartre's nausea, or even of an implacable neutrality. So that's the Stoic sage, or the Eastern sage, who has seen through the play of the world and is no longer invested. He can play the game without being invested. Zizek, now all that after 25 minutes of preparation, this is the new stuff. Zizek replies, yes, yes, or anything, just anything. The important is to know how this moment or this understanding is inscribed after in daily life. So is it inscribed as non-engagement, sort of disaffected wisdom, or fidelity and engagement? Is there an engaged affective fidelity? That's why the high point of Lacan for me is in these 3 seminars. So he says 2 of them, and he says the other one a little later. So I'll put them together. These 3 seminars. The Other Side of Psychoanalysis. Has that been translated yet? The Logic of the Phantasm, or the Logic of Fantasy, you could translate it, which is, and he goes on later to add encore. Anyhow, so these 3 seminars, the Other Side of Psychoanalysis, the Logic of the Phantasm, which is extremely important because that is where the decisive step is made, which consists in affirming the Cartesian cogito as the subject of the unconscious. It's the coming to terms, the final coming to terms with Heidegger, this paradoxical return to the cogito. So we've seen that from the very beginning, this idea of the cogito, the empty subject, which itself must not be substantified or treated as some substance, is a constant theme going throughout this set of conversations up to now. And then encore. Is it translated as encore? I should probably do some homework and see how Lacan has been translated into English. The problems are not solved. Lacan tried to resolve the impasses, but he didn't succeed. So a critique of Lacan. Lacan tried to solve this basic impasse of, in fact, you can't stay happy with the ecstatic encounter of the real, because Lacan, at his strongest, has demystified this notion of the real as a phantasm, as still a substantification. And the highest point of Lacan for Zizek is the real as a pure distortion of itself. So if you take that as the key point, you can't be satisfied by this goal of the cure as an encounter with the pure real, because in fact there is no pure real. So the coming back, which I would call the ritorno. I did a talk on the new book by Badiou, The Imminence of Truths, where I used Dante's Divine Comedy, where you have the inferno of neuroses and ideology. You have the purgatorio, where you work through the different concepts that can get you extracted from that inferno. Then you have the paradiso, where you get to absolute knowledge, and you realize that absolute knowledge is not some sort of final state, and there is no all-englobing set in Baju's theory. There's no all-englobing ultimate symbolization, and you come back, and that's where most of the theories fail, and where Baju actually tries to put in a lot of detail in the second half of the book, which I baptize the ritorno. So we're finding the problem of the ritorno, according to Zizek, was not solved by Lacan, was not solved by Miller, and they just sort of stuck on a conformist placeholder because they were unable to solve the ritorno problem. And I think that's where Zizek thinks his contribution lies. In this framework, there are several interpretations of Lacan. Lacan became more and more pessimistic. You asked, what happens in analysis? Is there nothing to discover? That was right at the beginning. The first question wasn't exactly formulated that way, but the first question of the book at the beginning of the first chapter was that. What did you, Zizek, discover in an analysis? And across that, what is there to discover? Zizek continues, but Lacan set out from, in his Discours de Rome, set out from a pseudo-Hegelian position. Zizek in brackets says, I insist on the pseudo here. He even makes a comparison, as you probably know, between the end of analysis and absolute knowledge. That is to say, symbolization complete. The whole argument of all of Zizek's work from the very beginning, from his thesis, is that this is a wrong notion of absolute knowledge. Absolute knowledge is not complete symbolization, but rather all can be described by all the concepts that turn around the notion of the absolute as belonging to the failures in the symbolic, the failures to symbolize. So then Lacan introduces the topics of the not all and of the big other. He has thus passed on to a more modest level. It is no longer complete symbolization, but the confrontation with the limit of symbolization of the real corked, bouché, or blocked by the phantasm. So number one, first position in this evolution is that the end of analysis is absolute knowledge conceived as complete symbolization. That doesn't work. Number two is the end of analysis is tied to the not all and the big other, and the traversing the fantasy. So this is what Zizek goes on to say. One must traverse the fantasy. But now he's going to go on to the third stage in Lacan's evolution, the last Lacan, and Jacques Alain Miller showed this in a very beautiful way, is even more modest. So complete symbolization is the opposite of modesty. It's hubris, in fact. And so one could say that it's still the hero's journey, and it's still ego psychology compared in itself. It was good, but compared to the later evolutions of Lacan, we can look back retrospectively and find that there's something hubristic in the epistemology of it. It's not personal hubris, it's epistemological hubris, and so ontological hubris, as compared with the last Lacan, who is more modest. The aim of the second Lacan was the one of traversing the fantasy, was to resolve the symptoms, and so to confront oneself with the fundamental fantasy and its traversal. Okay, we can already see the way it's set up, what could be objected to this second version of the end of the analysis, or the aim of analysis. It's no longer substantializing the real, but it's substantializing the fundamental fantasy, as if there was a real concrete thing. Once we go through everything, we get to the fundamental fantasy, and that will be the ultimate screen that is blocking us from the real. So we can imagine, and we'll be right, that this idea of confronting the fundamental fantasy is a crutch that has to be thrown away at the end. So the old Lacan, in the old Lacan, in the works of the old Lacan, even that is too much. He says it. I'm sorry if we can hear the noise. Somebody's doing some sort of work in their flat. Okay, in the work of the old Lacan, even that, the idea of resolving everything by confronting the fundamental fantasy, even that is too much. He says it in a very clear way in his seminars in the 1970s, that all that one can do is to get used to, come to some accommodation with one's symptoms, and change the relation with the symptoms. The idea even of solving the symptoms, or resolving the symptoms, and of coming to arriving at the fundamental fantasy, this idea is de trop, is too much, is an unnecessary presupposition that has to go. Lacan becomes, paradoxically, more and more modest. Okay, that's a very useful vision of Lacan's evolution over the question of the cure, as impulsed by his evolution over the question of the real. Fabian Tarby comments, it's the good neuroses. So we can't get rid of neuroses. We've got to get used to them and make them modulate into a good neurosis, as opposed to the bad neuroses that were wrecking our lives. Zizek replies, yes, that's it, literally, the good neurosis. All that one can do is to change one's attitude so that it is no longer to too too painful, too unbearable, so that one doesn't suffer too much. One must learn to live with one's symptoms. But that also has ontological consequences. This is what I've been saying in terms of the relation um, to the real, the evolution over the concepts of the real is in parallel with the evolution over the concepts of the aim and end of the cure. Zizek continues, I have always been critical, although seduced, about the seminar on the ethics of psychoanalysis, which has been crucial in the Anglo-Saxon world, as well as in Germany. Its influence is absolute. So that's the seminar where the injunction is one must not give up on one's desire, one must not cede on one's desire. But I think more and more that the vision that Lacan develops there in that seminar is an impasse, is a dead end. Lacan said or says that the desire of Antigone, this desire for a funeral, is a pure desire. But here, Lacan is too close to Bataille. So basically, we've seen Zizek critique the philosophies of difference, but he's also now criticizing the philosophies of transgression that were big in France for quite a while because of the massive influence of Bataille, but the idea of transgression was progressively overcome. I think it's overcome in Foucault's article in the 60s, Preface to Transgression, where he shows that transgression implies keeping in existence, or at least in conceptual existence, the law which is being transgressed. So you're not really changing anything. You're just shifting positions in the field that's been laid out by the principle that you claim to be calling into question by transgression. So Zizek is saying that Lacan is coming close to a transgressive idea of desire, and in that he's too close to Bataille. There enters into this vision, this conceptualization, something about the authentic moment. Remember, it's the ecstatic, the moment of the ecstatic encounter with the real, on the forcing of limits, on the excess of light, a light that is almost blinding, and which means that one can only return to normal life. So in terms of my concept of the ritorno, you transgress and you get to something, and it's sort of like a blinding light, and there's no way you can live with that. So there's a non-mediated, inexplicable return. It's sort of like a jump. You jump out, you see the light, you're blinded, it's going to burn you up. So you jump back into a cold and cynical normal life, living detached. So there's something wrong with the idea both of the can I say journey now that I've criticized the hero's journey? It's not a hero's journey. So there's something wrong with this conception of analysis as getting you to the point of an ecstatic encounter. And then sort of like Icarus, you fall back and you've got what? You've got a memory of your ecstatic encounter, or maybe you've had several. Maybe you know the way back and you can go on and have, when necessary, other encounters with the blinding real. But for the rest of the time, you're in your staid, ordinary life. So there's something wrong both with the ecstasy and with the ritorno. So paradise, too quick, too strong, and a too quick return. I'm putting in my terms, but everybody has to have terms. So this is almost a transgressive vision. So he keeps on saying almost. So it's almost like Bataille, but there's lots of other concepts going on that prevent Lacan from fully falling into that Bataillean transgressive vision. I think that one must abandon all that. And Lacan does abandon it. Already towards the end of Seminar 11, Lacan says that the desire of the analyst is not pure desire. So he's rejected the model of Antigone, which is supposedly, according to Lacan, at that moment, in the seminar on the ethics of psychoanalysis, is a pure desire. And that's not a model for Lacan, who claims later on in seminar, towards the end of Seminar 11, that the desire of the analyst is not a pure desire. I think that, Zizek continues, I think that this is a clear autocritique or self-criticism. It's already a matter of taking some distance with the position in the ethics of psychoanalysis. Finally, I want to say that even in Lacan, things are more complicated than the final moment that you, he's talking to Fabien Tarby, that you evoke. It's quite a legitimate thing for Fabien Tarby to bring up, or to have brought up, that if all that is ultimately to be downgraded to yet another more refined and so on, but a form of folklore, and it's to be jettisoned, what you're left with is the pure empty void as subject. Zizek says, okay, but it's more complicated than the final moment that you evoke. It's not only a confrontation with nothing, or with the nothing. So it is that, but it's not only that. Which nothing? So we've got to distinguish different types of nothing. Which nothing? There are different nothings. Okay, that's the end of the first section of chapter 2, and the second section I'll continue soon, maybe this weekend, and is called The Readings of Lacan. And remember, I said that's an ambiguous title, but because it can mean, and it does, the readings that Lacan made of other philosophers, and it can mean, and it does as well, because both are treated in this section, the different readings that people have of Lacan up to now. Okay, that's all. I hope this is useful. I think this is really not just the best set of interviews that I've seen with Zizek, but it's probably the best set of pedagogical moments where Zizek really stops and sort of almost you could write it up on a blackboard and sets out his differences with Lacan, the evolution of the concept of the real in 3 steps, so 3 differences, 3 different concepts of the real, and in 3 steps, the 3 evolutions in the concept of the aim and the end of analysis. So I think it's one of the most helpful documents we have understanding Zizek's general position. So I hope people are liking this, and I shall continue at least a little more.